Somewhere about halfway through the World of Warcraft's Shadowlands expansion, I was feeling a bit bored and fancied a change. Let's face it, WoW was definitely at a low point, so it is no wonder my attention had drifted. I had heard of Guild Wars 2, but only gave it surface level glances in screenshots and stuff. I remember an old friend having Guild Wars 1 years ago, and him explaining that it was like WoW, but it didn't have a sub fee. But I wasn't into MMOs as much back then, even though I did play WoW at the time very casually and very crappily. So fast forward a good 15 years maybe, and to that moment in time when I was looking for a new MMO, and I started to recall Waistcoat Cavill mentioning Guild Wars 2 on a number of occasions in his videos. I did a little reading around the internet and was becoming interested by the idea of horizontal progression that Guild Wars 2 offered. As a casual MMO enjoyer, I wondered whether this would be a perfect MMORPG for someone like me, and with a very generous free trial, there really was no reason not to try it. So off I go to the Guild Wars 2 website and I download the client, which, as I write this, it has reminded me that another reason Guild Wars 2 was in my periphery was that, as well as having seen it being mentioned by Josh Strife Hayes on a number of occasions, it was also due to get a release on Steam, so it had started appearing in searches that I was doing. As it wasn't out yet on Steam, I grabbed the client, created an account and logged in for the first time. Straight away, Guild Wars 2 do things a little different. Not a lot. Anyone who has played numerous MMORPGs will feel the familiarity with other games of the genre, but in what will come to be a bit of a theme, Guild Wars 2 does it in its own way. The character creation with its background choices, setting up some not consequential but nice personal lore, the races that you can select from that steer towards some classic fantasy archetypes, but again done with a little Guild Wars 2 flavour. You have the gnomish little race, your in touch with nature, elven plant-like people, the big Viking style Norn, the classic vanilla human, and perhaps one of the most interesting races in any MMORPG, the brutish and beastly Char. No self-respecting MMORPG dev would neglect the furry audience, Lord have mercy. Meow. I'd be lying if I didn't say that at the beginning the menus and the UX was a little bit second-rate feeling compared to something like WoW, but as Guild Wars 2's unique painterly style was present from the start, it compelled me to press on, and even though the early game stages all the way up to level 80 do look a bit dated, they really grew on me. After about 10 or so levels, I just sort of stopped and looked around me in the Sylvari starting area and thought to myself,
this feels like a proper MMORPG.
It really brought back the memories of exploring through a new MMO, and as it went on it felt expansive, even though the map is essentially split into numerous instance rectangles, rather than one sweeping open land. And it is indeed a joy to explore, with just a dash of sweet memories triggered by other MMOs I'd played. And on the point of exploration, that is what the game excels at. When you get released into the world once the initial tutorial's complete, it's like a child being released into an adventure playground and just flinging themselves into the ball pit, or a dog getting its leash taken off at the park and it just bolts into the middle of a field, spinning around with its tongue flopping all over the place, not knowing which things to chase first. That's what Guild Wars 2 feels like to me, a real feeling of freedom. And the way the game dishes you out chunks of story and then sort of stops and just says, go on you cheeky little scamp, just run around and see what you find. And that's what you do, and it's very enjoyable. People may have seen the Rose video where he makes jokes about being continually distracted by things happening. Quests that just start when you arrive in the area saying, don't worry about it mate, we know you're here to do the quest, so you just crack on and we'll just complete it and then hand you the rewards when you're done. And you don't even have to go back to the quest giver to get them. Or a sudden train of other players just running past you and you giddily join the pack and just flow towards the next thing that is happening, and maybe you'll find yourself pulled into a meta event and you might not know what the fuck is happening, but by God it is exciting. And all these things feel like you discover them organically. I saw Guild Wars 2 streamer Mighty Teapot say somewhere that Guild Wars 2 is quite a complex game really, and I think that is right, but if you have played an MMORPG before, then you kind of find it easier to just absorb each system as you go, or at least that is how I found it. As for what the experience of a complete noob to the game and the genre, I am not sure. I could see how this would be confusing, but then again, I could see how all MMORPGs would be confusing. I have explained MMORPGs to my partner on a number of occasions and she just looks at me like I'm fucking mad. But for me, Guild Wars 2 was a refreshing and exciting experience. One of the thoughts I had when I got into it was that it almost seems to perfectly fall at the centre of a sort of MMORPG Venn diagram. It had the more action-feeling combat of Elder Scrolls Online, fast-paced and dodging through attacks. It had the feel of an MMO like WoW and the world to explore, and then it had some of the Eastern aesthetic of something like Final Fantasy. I look on with envy at Final Fantasy players as I like the look of it, but I haven't quite cracked the game yet. I'll go back to it, but as I have explained in other videos, it is taking me a long time to get through the first expansion, and they just won't shut the fuck up. A perfect example of this in-between theme for me is the combat. Half tab target goodness and half action combat a la ESO. You can also go full action combat if you want, so there is even that option. But for me, it is tab target all the way, but with the added mobility that Guild Wars 2 provides, dodge rolling all over the show. Now I'll talk about weapons, builds and gear, etc. But for now, while we are still talking about aesthetics, come with me as I saddle up the old Raptor and we take a little walk through some of my favourite areas. Guild Guild Wars 2 feels like it mixes elements from many different MMORPGs, but again, it is smeared with its own unique style. And while it does tease you with that at the start, not showing all it has to offer straight away, the game gets more beautiful with every expansion that came out. I was already pretty sold by the style of the base game, but as soon as I got into the Heart of Thorns expansion, I was impressed by the verticality and the sudden change in the environment. Of course, this also became a massive headache as I continually got lost, but it was a definite step up from all previous areas. A real feeling of being in a dense jungle. The next expansion, Path of Fire, opens up a desert Egyptian style area, and I remember running over a bridge and just stopping to look at the architecture and all the colourful materials draped everywhere. And whilst the base game is quite colourful in places, it can be a bit brown at times in certain areas. But as the game goes on, it gets more and more colourful, and that is a very good thing. ArenaNet were really hitting their stride when they got to End of Dragons. Look how pretty this shit looks.
Look at it!
This is peaceful as fuck. The Secrets of the Obscure and Janthir Wilds expansions have some high points, but otherwise we're just maintaining generally high quality here to my mind, although I am quite partial to some nice red fields. The closer you look, the more you see Guild Wars 2's beauty. The animation on the enemies and on your mounts, the sound of the leather harness on your raptor, it all just makes me happy. And while we are still being shallow little fuckers, the fashion game is strong. Even without investing much time into earning currency to purchase outfits, I am still able to put together several fits for different characters. But of course, the most rizziest of all is my Mesmer main, Fruity Boutte, Prince of Pink, and serving hot cunt since 2022. And seeing as I have mentioned classes, let's talk about that. When you start playing Guild Wars 2 on your first character, you slowly get different skills doled out to you as you level. Eventually, you'll get a full complement of what I'll call your base combat skills, and then you work towards collecting hero points which allow you to purchase your supplementary skills. Gaining hero points is done by running all over the map and completing certain tasks or challenges, so woven into the experience of leveling is the very essence of adventure. These specializations allow you to unlock sort of mini skill trees where you can then select a number of passives that will apply to your character. You can then select 3 of these skill trees that will provide different passives, and so between the different combinations of those 3, you can really create some interesting builds whichever way you want it. Unlike other classic MMORPGs, your skills, while somewhat determined by your class that you choose at character creation, which I will add is not locked by your racial choice, you can be anything on anything, is further determined by what weapon you choose. Now there is some locking here by class as to what weapons you can use, but the system does provide a great amount of flexibility and options for your build. Of course, there will be a meta around these, that is to be expected, but I really don't ever feel that the meta impacts things as much in Guild Wars 2, especially not for me personally the way I play. And I've clocked up a reasonable amount of time across about 8 different characters, I think. Different weapons have different skills for each class, so if you're a ranger using a greatsword, you will have a different set of moves to a necromancer using the same weapon. Further to all this, once you get to top level, and provided you have purchased the various expansions, more on that later, you can start exploring the new maps and collecting hero points to unlock the elite specializations. This will add some more passive options to your build, and at this point I will add one small criticism I have, is that while in general Guild Wars 2's horizontal progression system does allow you to keep all gear and have it remain relevant, it does seem that the elite specializations are a bit more powerful than the base specialization, which I guess in some way is because they might have wanted to encourage players to adopt them rather than just stick with the core ones. Who knows, but I would like it if there was a bit more parity between them all. I could be wrong on that fact, maybe that isn't the case anymore, perhaps I was reading an article on PvP where perhaps it does matter more. I think in open world you can probably get along fine with the core specializations. Anyway, I love how you can craft these different builds. I have certainly had a lot of fun with it. As someone who can't seem to stick with one thing because the temptation of trying out the other classes is too great, I am always leveling alts just to see what is out there. I have several characters that I particularly enjoy for the playstyle they offer. My Mesmer, I mentioned earlier, which is my main character I always play through any of the story missions with, has gone through several iterations. I used to rock a greatsword and a scepter and pistol combo as a virtuoso, firing off spectral daggers in a shower of pink nonsense. But these days, I have become rather fond of my Chronomancer build and setting myself up with a staff and spear, generating illusions of myself that fight alongside me, still with an ungodly amount of pink sloshing all over the place as I batter the crap out of stuff in the overworld and lay down zones of damage. And before I move on to talk about some of my other builds, you have several tabs to store your builds and loadout, so if I want, I can be the Virtuoso or the Chronomancer at the click of a button. I also have a Soul Beast Sylvari Ranger, who one day I added a Fangdeboda as a pet, a sort of big worm thing, and when I did, and I merged with it, as is the power you get with a Soul Beast, it gave me some toxic abilities, where I could shoot out toxic poison, and a little spark went off in my brain, and I then set about trying to add every toxic and poison based ability to her that I could. My playstyle with her is to just sort of crash into things while unleashing a torrent of damage over time spells and then dodging away from danger. My Char Berserker Warrior is essentially Tigger, and I just bounce all over the place, and I try to load my skills with as many interrupts with the aim of just being an irritating little prick as I bounce all over the defend points in PvP. I am not saying that I am successful most of the time, but it feels like good fun, and I am sure someone is just busting a blood vessel getting mad at my unorthodox noobish behaviour in the battlegrounds. Then there is the Elementalist, the Necromancer, the Engineer, the Revenant, all there for me to play around with once I get to them. And once you know how to put all the builds together, I would say ignore the guides and just read tooltips and have fun experimenting. Which I suppose kind of brings me back to the idea of freedom that Guild Wars 2 gives me. Yes, this feeling is present in other MMOs, but with Guild Wars 2, I just feel like I can roam aimlessly and there will always be something to do. I think I was genuinely surprised when I first started and got to the first major city and found that there were loads of players all running around like maniacs, flaunting their crazy mounts and sparkly outfits. And talking about other players, let's talk about the social element of the game, or rather the non-social social element as I might like to call it and as I experience it. I personally, for reasons I have gone into at length, am not really a social MMO player. I play mostly solo, and while I might accept your invite to a guild, I may not participate much in chat and whatnot, but Guild Wars 2 can tease me into a bit of a grouped content, and by that I mean more overworld cooperation rather than specifically grouping up with other players. In one case, I remember seeing a congregation of players coalescing around a certain point in the Maguma jungle, and suddenly the meta event started and I find myself swept up in it. I didn't have a fucking clue what was happening. I was just fighting and running from here to there. I could see people coordinating and typing in the chat instructions for the 4 points and how we needed people at the West Gate, but I couldn't have told you how to get to the West Gate. I was just dizzy with excitement of shit popping off all around me.
Well, cut up a couple rails, buddy. I'm gonna blast off.
All right.
And blast off I did. And then suddenly, a pause and the dust settled and we broke through, and then everyone started sprinting for this hole in the fucking floor and we were all jumping down it and running about collecting loot, and I still didn't know what the fuck was going on or what I was picking up, but it was genuinely thrilling, and there have not been many times I've felt like that in an MMORPG. There are big overworld events in other MMORPGs, but I think that Guild Wars 2 reigns supreme in this area. Just for things like sheer scale of what's going on sometimes is kind of ridiculous. One of the main reasons that I think these things work so well in Guild Wars 2 is that they just sort of feel organic in how they occur and how they bring people together. Yeah, there are certain things that need to be completed or happen in order to get the meta event to trigger, but if you're close enough by and it happens. Another nice thing about the way things work is that you get XP and rewards from resurrecting other players. In Guild Wars 2, if you get taken down to 0 hit points, you don't immediately die. You are then prone and others can resurrect you, and whilst you are down, you get a new set of down skills where you can keep fighting whilst on the floor. The skills aren't particularly devastating, but you can fight back, and if you manage to kill your opponent, you will auto revive. But you will often see in a group meta events people running around healing people on the floor, and I don't know, it's a cool mechanic, but it also just seems nice that everyone is helping each other. Whilst not groundbreaking, the Wizard's Vault system of earning a currency which can be spent in a sort of mini shop for gear and other items uses a daily, weekly and quarterly quest track which directs you to different places around the world, meaning that wherever you go there will always be other players completing those same tasks to gain that currency, making the world feel further populated and lived in. But these kind of organic experiences did then spur me on to try some traditional group content like strikes and fractals. I haven't done a raid yet, but that is only because I get distracted and then go and start leveling a different character or switch games because I need to try different things and freshen shit up. And that leads me to talk about the amazing value proposition that Guild Wars 2 is. Now, value here is derived in two different ways and what we could class as, say, two different currencies of a sort. That being your time and your money. So firstly, time. Owing to Guild Wars 2's horizontal progression structure, any weapon, armor set, etc. will always be just as useful no matter how much new content is released. With other games, you progress in a linear fashion where you keep earning XP to go up levels and you'll reach a level cap, say level 60, and then the next expansion comes out and they have to raise the level cap to say 70. Now that weapon you add is now a piece of shit and you need to level up to get to 70 and get yourself a sweet new sword or some shit, and then you are back where you were until the next expansion and the level cap gets raised again. And not with Guild Wars 2, you just keep your sweet weapon, maybe you go looking for new skins for it so it looks fucking dope or whatever, but it will always be useful and effective. And now that is not to say that this is objectively the best system, because I would be lying if I didn't say that there is definitely a little crack-like dopamine hit when you hear that level ding. But in terms of value proposition, Guild Wars 2 has it, as you can put this little baby down, wander off, cheat on it with other games, come back a year later maybe, and it is just there waiting for you. You can just carry on, no pressure, just jump back in and carry on where you left off. So as well as the game being very enjoyable to people like me, there is also a lot of complexity here for the eggheads. So don't just think that this is a simple game for simple people, it will cater to the hardcore if you want it. Anyway, let's not get dragged off topic. The horizontal progression paired with the fact that this is a pay once and own forever model means that it feels like an incredibly fair transaction. Before I talk a bit more about how the game itself gives you good value, I will just cover the cash shop. There is one, and there are a lot of little quality of life purchases like storage upgrades and extra character slots, which while reasonably priced are a teeny bit, maybe not predatory, but I think that you will find yourself being pushed towards them. Now I don't think it's quite as bad as say the Elder Scrolls Online's optional monthly sub, that if you play that game regularly then there is no question that you have to buy. It's too useful not to. Even if it does give you access to past expansions with it and the crafting bag that will hold all your crafting items, which will very quickly overwhelm you if you don't have it, that one to me feels like you are pushed towards having to buy it. With Guild Wars 2, it works in a slightly different way, but I personally think is less essential. It more annoys you into it. Even though I personally haven't spent any money on storage expansions, but I have bought some extra character slots. As I've said, I do like an AWP, but at £3.50 a pop, it isn't prohibitively expensive. However, you can technically earn cash in-game, which you can then exchange for cash shop currency. It will be slow going, but if you do a little bit of work on learning the most profitable methods, you can probably farm up these extras pretty easily. You can also use that cash shop currency to buy the expansions as well, so if you want to get on that grind, you could not spend a penny. Although I'm not going to attempt to do the maths on what it would take to earn enough gold to buy all the expansions and the Living World quests. I'll have a little Google, and if I find anything I shall put something here. But back to value, the base game, which is completely free, also gives you access to other activities as well, like for instance PvP. If you want to play PvP, you can literally do it from the first moment you get into the game. Well, as soon as you've left the short tutorial, you could then enter the lobby and never come out again. You can even earn tomes of experience, so you could literally use that to just level up your character and never touch anything else. Some of the elite specializations are tied to the various expansions, as I mentioned earlier, so you would need to purchase those to try them out in PvP, but you could milk hours upon hours of PvP fun time before deciding if you want to go in on it. You could also play World vs World, but quite frankly, with all the overworld content available, PvP dungeons and fractals, etc., there is more than enough to allow you to make an informed decision on whether to buy the expansions, and when you do, they aren't as expensive as most full price titles out there, and you will instantly see the improvements in the content, and it is good content. I don't talk too much about the story very often because I'm not very story focused, but as you get into the later expansions, it moves away from cutscenes and just delivers lines of vocals about the story as you're kind of playing the game. So for someone like me, I don't have to stop doing what I'm doing, and I can kind of ignore it, but I get fed just enough information so that I know that what is generally going on. I mean, if we want to fucking do a TLDR, big fucking dragons, kill it. Big sparkly dragon is your friend. Eventually, no more dragons, weird big things, kill them. Standard fantasy type guff. I mentioned World vs World there, and that is another activity that you can just sort of get into even as a solo player. You join a map and find your commander's tag and then just zerg about the place, kicking the shit out of everything until another zerg group kicks the shit out of you. And while I am talking about activities, the overworld is just packed with chill things to do. Map completion, overworld bosses, mount races, jumping puzzles. I haven't done all these things yet, and they are something I plan to do, but there is just so much there, it will keep you busy for a long time to come. These are the kind of activities I love about MMOs, just cruising about with a podcast on or YouTube, relaxing in an online world. Good stuff. While I am edging towards a more vibey type of place, I just think that Guild Wars 2 is an exceptionally chill and on the whole wholesome MMORPG. I've played loads of them at this point, and I always have to ignore a lot of the general chats because there is a lot of casual homophobia, transphobia or racism. I think maybe Albion Online may hold the crown for that. Sweet Jesus, there is some demented shit in there. But perhaps that's what you get with mega servers, and maybe it is a reflection on a smaller player base that Guild Wars 2 has, that it's not like that. But perhaps the more casual elements of the game engender a more casual and peaceful attitude. I certainly think that Guild Wars 2 might be the gayest MMO. Now, I'm not a gay man myself, but I do love the fabulous vibes. It isn't free of toxicity, obviously. Predictably, PvP has its fair amount of shitheads who want to gob off about how it is everyone else's fault that we lost, except them of course. But in general, they are in ranked, so if you just want to play for fun, you can not play ranked and just have fun. I am a member of a small guild, and I must say that while I think they might be a little bit younger than me, they are such a wholesome bunch that I have even been tempted into conversations. I've had some lovely conversations with them. They're all from all around different places. It's kind of restored my faith in humanity a bit. Now, There is something that is worth considering when I talk about my love for this game and my experience, and that is when I came to it. When I came to the game, there was almost a decade of content to explore. All the mounts were available and I could just whiz all over the place and really traverse. And again, traversal is one of this game's strongest points. The mounts let you travel up or down. They're all made to serve a certain niche. The bunny jumps, the skimmer floats across water, your raptor leaps across wide chasms, and your warclaw now will sniff things out and allow you to fight on its back. And they are all exceptionally animated as well. But would I have enjoyed this game at launch in 2012? I'm not sure. The game would still be pretty big with plenty of activities available that I mentioned earlier, but there were no mounts, and all the best stuff is in the expansions that came later. There is also the consideration of what would my opinion be in 2012. As a person, I was a different person then. I am much older, I have changed, my opinions have changed. Certainly it would have been different to now. And whilst I've always loved fantasy and I've played WoW on and off for a long time and other RPG games, around the time this came out I was deep in a FIFA and Football Manager hole, and I don't think you could pull me out of that.
I'm forever blowing bubbles!
So it's impossible to say. Too many variables, but it certainly was a different game at launch than it is now. But that's to be expected. But if you are someone coming to this now, you can just work your way through an absolute shit ton of content. You could buy each expansion in order as you get to it, no need to buy everything, although you can buy all the DLC on Steam for just under 100 quid, so not the craziest amount of money. We're not talking like I've heard about that Stellaris game and I want to get into that, and oh look, if I want to get the up-to-date version of that, I'm going to have to buy about fucking 50 different DLC packs. But as I said, you could buy each one as you finish the last one and you will have a great time for potentially years to come. And you can take breaks, do something else, load it up every now and then as a relaxing thing to do while you chill out with something on the second screen. I suspect a lot of people who will click on this video may already be Guild Wars 2 fans. But if there are any other MMORPG fans who have always wondered about it but never tried, then I urge you to give it a go. Even the base game, dated as it is a great and comprehensive taste of what the game is, and it only gets better from there. If you want another example outside of me, then go to Preach Gaming's channel and watch his experience with the game as someone that had never played it before. I genuinely think that whilst he obviously plays lots of other games, from watching him play the game you can see that there is a genuine love of this game. I haven't gone into every part of this game in great detail because I want to try to keep this video under 30 minutes, but if you are interested in anything I have spoken about, no doubt bigger YouTubers like Loranity or Mighty Teapot or Caffeinated Dad will have a video exploring that topic, so check them out. While I will always keep my monthly sub going for WoW and hold it up as one of the best MMORPGs ever, I think Guild Wars 2 might just be my favourite MMO for all that it offers and its unique style. And that's why I love it.